Town Hall Theater. My name is Becky Dayton, and I own the Vermont Bookshop, downtown Middlebury. Thank you, Stephen. We are the independent bookstore behind this event and so many others that are happening in recent months and weeks, and I'm thrilled to be a part of it. I would like to thank the Town Hall Theater, Lisa Mitchell, and all of the amazing volunteers that give their time to serve as ushers at these events and to welcome you into this beautiful space. I have a couple of housekeeping things I'd like to go through before we start the meat of the matter here. First of all, take a minute to silence your cell phones, please. I think we all think we've done it, and we haven't. So double check. And I need to point out the emergency exits. There is one here at stage left. I believe that's stage left. I'm not a theater person. I might be right, but over there. Stage right. And there are two at the back of the theater where you came in. This evening we have books available for sale in the lobby if you missed them and you came in the other door. All of the books have been pre-signed this evening. If you want to have your book personally inscribed, both Carolyn and Julia will be available after the event, but only until 9 p.m. So if you find yourself in the signing line, speaking with Julia or with Carolyn, please be mindful of the folks behind you so that we can get people out and in bed by Vermont midnight, which is 9:30. I will be handing out Post-it notes in the signing line and asking folks to write the name of the person to whom you'd like the book inscribed on that Post-it note. And if you find yourself speaking with Julia, do her a favor and introduce yourself, because it can be very difficult to remember people's names when you're being confronted with faces in a big space like this. Finally, traffic. It would be great if people could exit that way, pick up a book if they need it, and re-enter the theater into the signing line in the opposite door on the South Pleasant Street side. Okay, so that's all the really dull stuff. Now on to the main event. I am, of course, honored to host Julia Alvarez in her hometown, but I'm doubly pleased to present her in conversation with Carolyn Kuebler. Carolyn Kuebler is the co-founder of the literary journal Rain Taxi and is currently the editor of New England Review, which was founded here in Middlebury by Stephen Donadio, who is here in the second row. No, am I wrong? He's waving his finger. He edited for 20 years. But thank you, Stephen, for doing that. Carolyn's debut novel, Liquid, Fragile, Perishable, is to be published officially next Tuesday, but it's available for sale tonight alongside Julia's new novel, as we hosted a launch event last week for Carolyn at the bookshop. Carolyn is a talented writer and storyteller, and I am immensely grateful to her for agreeing to join Julia on stage this evening. Julia Alvarez, who in this community needs little introduction, was awarded the National Medal of Arts by President Obama in 2013. Born in New York City to Dominican parents, Julia spent her early childhood in the Dominican Republic before fleeing to America with her family in 1961, after her father took part in a failed coup attempt against dictator Rafael Trujillo. Her parents valued education above all else and made certain she received the highest quality education possible, which included sending her to boarding school at the tender age of 13. She graduated from Middlebury College in 1971 and earned a master's degree from Syracuse University. In 1991, she published her first novel, How the Garcia Girls Lost Their Accents, and quickly rose to prominence, going on to publish 5 novels, 5 more novels, several collections of poetry, nearly a dozen works for children and young adults, and 3 works of nonfiction. Tonight we are celebrating the publication of Julia's mesmerizing and inventive 7th novel, The Cemetery of Untold Stories. Please help me welcome debut novelist Carolyn Kuebler and literary legend Julia Alvarez.
Hello.
Hello.
Oh,
Are we on?
we're on.
Very nice. So here we are, Julia, on stage. I've only been backstage at Town Hall Theater many times, so being on stage is quite thrilling. Thank you so much for agreeing to speak with me about your beautiful new book. It's an honor to sit down with our local neighborhood storyteller, who also happens to be a world-renowned storyteller. Her books have meant so much to millions of people around the world, so it's just great to have you here with us and with all of these folks in the audience on the 10th stop of your tour already. So Julia has already been to Philadelphia, New York, DC, New Hampshire, many places in Massachusetts, and later we'll be heading to Santa Fe and Austin. But we have her here with us in our hometown tonight, so thank you, Julia.
Thank you, Carolyn, for
Welcome.
hosting me tonight.
Well, so I think what we're going to do tonight is Julia and I are going to talk for maybe about a half an hour. We're going to ask each other questions, and then we'll have another Q&A with all of you. So hopefully we'll be able to see who's asking questions, and we'll have your questions for Julia as well. We'll also have a little tiny reading. Is that right?
Yes.
A little tiny reading. So maybe we should begin by just setting up the book a little bit for your audience, so when they hear you read, they'll know what they're getting into.
Okay.
Okay.
I made a mistake, and I brought the Spanish version. I won't read it in Spanish, but there should be an English version in there.
Right,
yeah, but mine's got all the answers in it. From my teaching life, your copy.
The annotated.
Here, honey, just give it to me. I think it should be there. Oh dear. I think I might not have brought it. You're right. There's plenty of them here, but how could I have done something so?
Well, you don't have to read it if you need the.
No. I can.
You're welcome to this copy.
Right. Oh my goodness.
So
I'm so sorry. I really already have messed up, and we haven't even started.
Well, why don't we should set it up a little bit, and you've probably run through this synopsis a few times so while you're finding your spot, I'll give people a little bit of an idea of what the book is.
You think that maybe if I introduce the reading, it won't give the background? Or maybe you go ahead.
No, you go. No, you go.
I don't have my notes.
We're going to
now.
do this all night long. No. Go ahead. You go first.
Well, the Cemetery of Untold Stories. It's about an older writer, Alma, pen name of Scheherazade, and we learn in the first part of the novel why she's had to choose this pen name, which comes. Scheherazade was the storyteller in the Arabian Nights, and anyhow, Alma has chosen this pen name. She's had a hard career at the beginning, but then she had some success, and then she runs out of creative stamina. Her duende diminishes, and she decides that she is got to accept that there's a close to the creative life as there is to the biological life, and she will close up her writing life, and she thinks of what is a closure, and she's given closure to all the characters that she's written about, and what would be the closure for her life? She wants something that has a kind of meaningful ending. So she decides to pack up all those unfinished novels and rough drafts and unrealized characters that she has sitting in boxes all around her house, and take them back to the Dominican Republic, her homeland. And she happens to have inherited an abandoned plot in a very poor barrio next to the town dump in the Dominican Republic, and she decides that she will take them there. I think that sets it up pretty well. So I'm just going to be reading now from the second part of the novel, where where we shift from her point of view, and we're now in the barrio's point of view, all the people around watching all this strange construction going on and wondering what's going to happen there. And maybe there'll be some jobs. And there's all these stories that get started about what's going to happen there. And so we're in the thick of that, and they finally go to the foreman. The only other thing I think you need to know about is that there's a character also, Brava. She's a sculptor and an artist in the Dominican Republic who is helping Alma launch this project on the ground. So after several weeks of bulldozing and clearing, a stucco wall goes up, topped not with broken glass or concertina wire, but with fanciful ironwork, butterflies perched atop flowers, birds taking flight, dolphins leaping into the sky. A children's theme park, a private primary school, an art academy. The foreman seems to be the only person the locals can find to talk to them. He knows very little, but he tells them what he knows. The place is to be un cementerio, a cemetery. Muertos and zombies roaming the streets at night, encampments of the homeless defecating behind mausoleums and burning their cooking fires on Abuelita's gravestone. And what jobs will a cemetery provide that anyone but the desperate would want? The people in the barrio may be poor, but they have their pride. Insulting enough that the city dumps its trash in their backyard without now adding to that injury with their dead. The foreman reassures them, bunching his lips at the fanciful wall with its playful sculptures. This is not to be a run-of-the-mill cemetery, but a place of mucho respeto y orden, no riffraff, no freeloaders. As for spirits and ghosts, there be none of those either, as this is not to be a cemetery for people. Para mascotas, entonces? Those who work as maids and gardeners know firsthand how attached the rich are to their pets. When their little dogs die, the owners mourn them more than they do other people's children. But generally, these pets are buried on the grounds of their owners' estates. The foreman shakes his head. No, the cemetery is not for pets either. But if not for people or animals, who is it for? This is as much as the foreman has been told. All he knows is that he has never felt happier in a job. For the first time since he became a foreman, he pitches in, working the backhoe, removing stones alongside his Haitian crew. He leaves the job refreshed. No need to stop on the way home at the barra or colmado and pick up a bottle of rum and drown himself in forgetfulness, ignoring his mujer and swatting at his kids if they make too much noise. Instead, he converses openly with his wife and children, remembering things he has long forgotten. Amorcito, his wife teases, did you eat parrot for your almuerzo today? The owner stops by to review the progress of her project, a skinny woman with a lined face, graying hair, and an unpronounceable name that sounds like Che Guevara. Doña, he addresses her by way of avoiding it. No, Doña, just call me Alma, la Doña says, shaking his hand like a man. She is accompanied by a small, energetic woman with the easier name of Brava, about the same age, but half the size of the other. One would think she is a dwarf, but all her body parts are in the right proportions, except for her large workman hands. She talks a mile a minute. The locals continue to pester him, so the foreman decides to go ahead, phrasing his question as a community request. The people in the barrio would like to know who the cemetery will be for, if not for people or pets or toxic materials. The owner laughs, a bright, sharp sound which ignites the small one's laughter. Perdón, she apologizes. I don't mean to be secretive, just that people never understand when I tell them. It's going to be a cemetery for stories. The foreman shakes his head, the way he does at the beach to get water out of his ears. Cuentos, he repeats. The women laugh again. Yes, he has heard correctly. Interesting, the man says, so as not to appear ignorant. Next time someone asks, He says the cemetery is for los locos, the crazed, the deranged. Well, wait, aren't locos people too? I'm just the foreman, he shrugs. A sign goes up on the wall at the main gate. Cementerio de cuentos nunca contados, a cemetery for untold stories. The only way to enter is to speak into a small black box at the front gate. Cuéntame, a woman's soft voice requests. Tell me a story. Only then does the door open, or not. Thank you. Your copy's better than mine.
It's pretty good.
Yeah. No.
Well, thank you for reading that.
I
Actually,
don't know what I could have been thinking of. I'm not in the DR. Code switching doesn't always work.
Yeah, well, I think that sums it up really well, and it's more fun than reading the back of the book.
Yeah.
Which people may have already done. So.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I think one of the things that is most striking to me about reading this book is how many layers there are. So you have, I feel like the author or the Alma character starts off saying, I just can't tell these stories, I'm just going to bury them, I'm finished, I can't do it. And then these stories come out. But at the same time as those stories come out, the stories of the people at the cemetery, like we could just tell from this passage, come out. The story of Alma's family comes out. So many layers of history, of the present, and all of it. But you don't really notice this is happening. Like, it just happens. There's this very smoothness to it. So it goes down quite easy. You know, you're not realizing that, like, oh, suddenly we're in history. Oh no, now we're in the future. And now we're in the present. But it just goes. So I think it's quite beautiful how you've strung it all together like
her
that.
pen name is Scheherazade, and the Arabian Nights, it's all about the proliferation. I mean, this is what stories do. One story begets another, and so I wanted to have that kind of dynamic going on, as you do in your novel, of the many stories interacting.
Yeah, we do like a lot of stories, a lot of voices coming out of, it's almost like you turn this way and you hear one, and you turn that way and you hear the other.
And for me, it kind of, at least, I find it presents for me a more interesting picture of reality when we have diverse points of view instead of just one hero and one point of view.
I think you do that a lot in your books, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's one of your maybe favorite techniques.
Well, it comes from my oral storytelling culture that I think, the stories are constantly migrating from one person to another, and they get changed and they get added on to, and whatever. It's,
Yeah, you also mentioned once that somebody asked you, who told you all the stories as a child? Because storytelling has been part of your life forever. And you said, well, one person would start it and another person would pick it up, and everybody told stories.
We were in a dictatorship, so media, whatever media there was heavily controlled by the state, and so not very interesting things happened there. But people always in the Dominican Republic talked about the Radio Bemba. It was called Radio Big Mouth. And that was alive and well. Everybody told stories. Oral storytelling was not a literary culture. I didn't grow up reading books or being around readers. There weren't that many books around, but they were the best stories.
Yeah.
And later when I went to an MFA program, and I was learning about character and pacing and humor and all of that, I realized that I had learned that in my childhood from people who didn't even know how to read or write.
Yeah.
That they had it. And I'm really indebted, even though I thought when I entered the program that I had a deficient childhood because I hadn't read Charlotte's Web or Winnie the Pooh, but I'd listened to Chucha and Tati and
well, they gave you a great gift, right? They gave you
but
a great
gift. I couldn't really brag about that. I didn't think back then.
Yeah, no, they gave you so much, so many stories that you could then write. I wonder also about poetry in your life. You talk a lot about stories and storytelling, and that was from childhood, from forever. But poetry seems very important in your books as well. A lot of characters will cite their lines, and it just seems very important. So when did you start listening to poetry or writing poetry?
I didn't start writing or have a literary life until we came to this country and I learned English. But growing up, I don't know how many of you, if it was something of the past or it was just in the Dominican Republic, we had recitations.
Oh.
When company would come, were put in party dresses and we would be marched out and we each had our little repertoire. And I loved it. Any poem that was read to me, a few times, I would learn it by heart, and I loved reciting them. So I had that love of poetry. And my first love when I started writing was poetry, because I think I gravitated towards poetry because it's musicality. And back then we were reading, very formal verse and rhymed and cadenced. And I felt like I was able in poetry to speak my Spanish and English. There was a musicality that was reminiscent of my native language. And so that was my first love. I wanted to be a poet. Then I realized I needed a day job, so I became a novelist. And that was really a smart move.
The most lucrative day job one can imagine. Very good.
And then I became a teacher, so.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so they do serve different purposes in your life, but they both came from childhood and have music to them.
Right.
Yeah.
And I only recognize this now later in life, when I realized it didn't start in 1960 when we came to this country.
Mm-hmm.
It was there before. Yeah. The love of language and storytelling.
So speaking of stories, there are a couple of people in this new book whose stories are they possess Alma, I think, the most strongly, and they refuse so she takes all these boxes and all these notes, gets them down there, and they burn a lot of them, and then they bury the ashes, and then they have these beautiful sculptures to mark each grave, but some of them will not burn. There are two who just refuse, and they kind of become the pillars of the cemetery story culture. So one of them is Alma's father, Papi, and the other one is the first wife of Trujillo. So tell us a little why these two became the most, they refused the most.
Well, I think that with writers, there's a kind of possession that happens, and the way you exercise that story that's in your head or that character is by writing them down. And so those two are the ones that won't quit. I mean, she really thinks that it's, she will bury them and that will honor and give closure to them. But like that saying at protest rallies, they tried to bury us, they did not know we were seeds. She tried to silence us, she didn't know we were stories. So they have stories to tell, secret stories that Alma could never access for some reason.
Right.
And that comes across as the novel proceeds, why she didn't have access to those.
Yeah, like sure, the stories they didn't release themselves to her, but
Right.
they do release themselves in some other way.
Yep.
And that's one of the things I find really compelling about the novel is the sort of meta aspect of it, where you have all these stories, and the stories are just as engaging as any story might be, but then there's also this sort of like, but why, but who's telling the story, and then there's the outside of the story, and there's the story within the story, and then there's the story within the story within the story.
None of them are going to want to read this book. It sounds like you need the Cliff Notes with it, right? No, it's easier than that.
No, but I love that. I mean, I think that's really fun. There's this idea of like, there's a story that will not release itself to this author. She's going crazy. Just like these stories, I needed to tell them, and I just don't. You have boxes and boxes.
Yeah.
But then they whisper to someone who they know will not divulge them.
But also because she's a better listener. And see,
Yeah.
that's the thing, that sometimes with our stories, we get in the way. we as the author, because we have a set idea of what a character should do or what would be interesting, what would please a reader, all the other things that you have to forget and entregarse. There's a wonderful surrender to your character in that moment. And a lot of times you'll really love a story and a character, and there's a mystery because there's as you know, it's a mysterious thing. Why, how it works, and how it proceeds, and how it stops, and where you get stuck, all of that. And so why a story will not allow itself to be written by you, a lot of times I think it's the writer gets in the way because you have another agenda and you're trying to colonize your story with a preconceived notion of what it should deliver and what you want from it. And that's, whereas the person in the cemetery is there, she listens. She really listens. And yeah.
Well, maybe you'd like to tell us a little about this intriguing character, Filomena, who listens. She's the one who is hired as a groundskeeper. Isn't she the first who tells the story?
Yeah.
To the little box. So
yeah,
she's
you have
the first
to
one.
press a button to get in the cemetery, and it says, "Tell me a story," and then by some dynamic, whoever is monitoring it knows whether it's a good story or not. And if she's pleased, you're allowed in, and nobody can seem to get in because they just come with things that they've seen in a Disney movie or a telenovela, and she gets to the stuff that she keeps.
What's that? The chisme?
Chisme. Yeah, the gossip. But she gets to the stuff in her that she hasn't spoken about all her life. She's been so silent, and she says that, and the door's open.
And guess what? We learn her story too.
Yes, we do.
It just flows one into the next.
Right.
Yeah. And she's actually quite an interesting person, but nobody seems to know this because she just really doesn't say.
And she doesn't know how to read or write.
Yeah.
And she's just a quiet jamona, old maid in the barrio. And so people just think she has nothing in her.
Yeah, and they're wrong, of course.
As are we all when we think stories are walking around us all the time.
There's another interesting aspect of this, the stories walking around us all the time, and there's a little argument that happens with Alma and Brava. Brava is the sculptor who makes all these amazing snow globes and dolphins and all of the beautiful things in the cemetery, where I think Alma says, so the story is told to Filomena. They're not really sure. They think she's listening and hearing things, and they said, well, maybe that she's being told this story because they know she's not going to use it. She's not going to turn it into art like some other people we know.
Yeah.
And then Alma, I think, even says there's some violence to that sometimes, some violence to telling the story. And then Brava says, no, it's surrender and it's love. That's all it is. So there's a little argument between them about that. So could you talk a little bit about the story that maybe doesn't want to be shared, or maybe the story, I mean, I think we have this idea that everyone has a story and it should be told, but some people don't want their story told, and that's part of this.
Or they only want it told within certain groups. You know, as I said, I came from a storytelling family, but entre familia, you never went outside. Part of it was a dictatorship. You went outside and told a story, you could get into serious trouble. So there was that protective thing, but you know, we have our select little campfire group, and then if you go outside of that, it's almost like you are betraying, because stories have power. And to have the stories of a community can be a powerful tool that you have.
Right.
And so there's that protectiveness. But I think also it's something that I've talked about with writers, those of us who are diaspora writers, that we've come from other cultures and places and brought that wealth into the so-called first world. And there's a sense of, is this part of that on a sort of abstract level of the same exporting your goods and the best you have to offer for the delectation of the first world, and not kind of the brain drain fear that you have, that you're taking it from another culture. So I think that's part of why Alma also wants to take the stories back, because that's where they belong, and that's where their characters belong. So it's, I'm not writing because I have an answer or a polemic that I want to argue one side or another, because I don't think stories do that. That's what I love about them.
Yeah.
It just, as Chekhov said, the task of a writer is not to solve the problem, but to state it correctly. To try to get at all the possibilities. And so Brava thinks, no, it's a gesture of love to share the stories. It's nourishment of the soul. And Alma says, no, but there's a violence to it. There's a violation to it. So there is that tension too in the book.
Yeah, and as the author of the book, you don't say yes or no to either of them. You
No.
let them have their argument and let it play out, and then the reader can decide and maybe argue with them a little bit too.
Or enter the full nuance and complexity of the issue instead of coming down on one side or another.
Right.
What I love about stories, that they have that kind of like a disco ball, it's just flashing here or there, a different light. And I love that stories can do that.
I know you. I get the sense you love stories quite a lot.
Yeah.
So you write in many forms. So you've got the children's books, you have some nonfiction, novels, picture books, and young adult. So if a story comes to you, do you decide, oh, well, now I'm going to write a children's book, and now let's find a story for that? Or do you have this, how do you decide which form it's going to take?
Well, the way, when people say, where do your ideas come from? I say, gosh, if they came to the door an idea, I would never open it. I call it a pebble in my shoe. It's something that gets, and I can't shake it out of my head until I write it down. And it might be something, an issue or situation that has really captivated me, or character. And I think as you muse on it, because the muse for me is musing on it, it sort of finds its form and what would be the target audience. And I never think, oh, now I'm going to take it easy and write a children's book, because I think they're really hard to write, for one thing. But it's sort of, I'm writing for children of all ages if I'm writing for children.
Right.
So I'm not thinking of that with those kind of labels that then make it, that you need, if you're going to market it, what your target audience or reader is going to be, or where you're going to put it on the bookstore, on a shelf in a library. But you're not thinking that way. So I think
that comes later.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So which form it is not what you're thinking at the offset.
Right.
You're just.
But I think very much what the
express it.
topic is, or what who the characters are, will then decide it for you.
Yeah.
And you're also deciding it. It's a dynamic more than you come, at least the way I work. Others work differently.
Sure.
That you come with a set idea. So for instance, Return to Sender, I was involved with the migrant farmers and their kids at school. And I was translating for a kid in one of the schools. And I realized that she was so terrified that she was going to get home, and it was during the dragnet operation called Return to Sender, where they would go in the workplace, nab the workers, and deport them. She was afraid she'd get home and her parents would be gone. So she was terrified. And the farm kids that were there were all confused about how their parents, who were really good Americans and tried and true patriots, how they could be doing something that was illegal. And so I said, oh, we need a story to understand what is happening to us. So it came out of that situation. And so then it just found its readers,
Right.
Its target or age group or whatever. But that's how they start. And sorry to go on about it, but it's in the moment. In the moment that it's the situation that brings forth.
Determines that.
Yeah.
And that brings me to a question I wanted to ask you also about Vermont. So I know you've been out in the world touring with this book, and they probably don't ask you this one, but right. So you speak a lot about it. I've read other interviews where you say that Vermont is the most sort of like the Dominican Republic because of the small town aspect of it. Everybody knows everybody's business. Not the weather, but a lot of other things surprisingly, a lot of other things about Vermont do remind you of at least the Dominican Republic as you grew up in it, the part that you grew up in. So I was going to ask you, what stories of Vermont, but you just told us one already. A story of Vermont that you needed to tell because you were a person of two homelands now.
Right. And also, when you are in a place for a while, its stories come, and it's the location and its rhythms come into your work if you're alive in it. I mean,
and
what
you've
is
been
it?
here a long time.
Longer than I ever was in the Dominican Republic.
Yeah. So when you go out there, we're like the Vermont writer Julia Alvarez.
Well, after the first 2 novels, I think I got a letter from a Vermont high school student saying, I'm having an argument with my teacher in my English class, and she has you on our syllabus, and it's a syllabus on Vermont writers. So are you a Vermont writer or are you not a Vermont writer? She's going to take the truth to the teacher. And I said,
that's great.
So I wrote back and I said, I'm a Vermont writer from the Dominican Republic, or maybe I did I'm a Dominican writer from Vermont, but that it is, they are two. This is the place, Vermont, where I came into my writing.
Yeah.
I went to Middlebury College. I was taking writing workshops there. Up at Breadloaf. I mean, this is so much where I came of age as a writer. So I think of it as my other birthplace.
You have 2 sets of roots.
Yeah.
Yeah, I loved how you put that in the other night on the Vermont Public. There was the idea of the 2 languages, and because Alma says, "Oh, I don't think my roots of English go deep enough," and you said that for you, the roots of both languages they grow together underground, which is, I think, a really beautiful way to put it, because the languages do feed each other that way.
Well, and that's what I love about American English. It's so messy.
Yeah.
Whitman called it a barbaric yacht.
That's right.
Because it's taken infusions from everywhere, and made them part of English. And we've got so many words and so many rhythms. It's not just the words and stories that have come in, as we have all these writers that have come from other places and other traditions, but we also have their syntax and the ways that they mold English and all of that mess. I love that English is such a wonderful, vibrant,
Sure.
We don't have a Royal Academy of Language the way that Spanish does. The Academia Real de la Lengua Española in Spain, and they decide what are words that are going to be.
What's allowed.
Yeah.
Well, so I just have a very quick story about our neighbor Julia Alvarez that just, I don't know, I think it's just so great, and it's about that sort of small townness, is that when the Tia Lola books came out, the second round of them came out, I read them all to Vivian, my daughter, who was 6 at the time, and Julia had found out about this and said, well, why don't we have a tea party? I'll be Tia Lola, and you can invite the children over. So we had a bunch of first graders.
We had a tea party.
And had a tea party over at Julia's house, and she put on the boa and gave all the kids boas, and they had a blast.
Yeah. Well, your Vivian she really loved stories, and she loved make-believe. And she's been on stage here, right?
Yes, she has.
So she was really into the character.
Oh, yeah.
And so we did a tea party, and it was wonderful. They all got magic yellow boa, and we had tea, I think,
and
it
cakes,
was,
yes.
and cakes, and it was wonderful.
She remembers colors, is what she said.
Yeah. Well, I was dressed up as Tia Lola.
Yeah. Well, and then also you said that at her graduation, you were the one in the back clapping. So you really do see the cycles of life with
That's
people
what
in
I
a
love
small
about
town like that. Like you just get to who's around, who grows up, and where they go off to, and
and you're in touch with the rhythms of life in a hands-on way, you know, the weddings and the deaths and births.
Yeah.
You know, you have to.
We're all connected.
We're all connected. You know, if your car goes off the road and someone comes by with a tractor in the wrong politics, you choose the tractor. What the hell do you care? And then this person is like, oh my gosh, a kind soul. So I love that there's that possibility here.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
Yeah.
And so speaking of, I have a whole other page of questions, but I think that I think it's already time to turn the questions over to our neighbors here as well and see if they have anything they'd like to ask you about your new book or any other books. So I'm not sure how we're going to do this.
We can't even see you all.
Do we have
But I also
Here
want to
comes
thank Carolyn, who has done, my goodness, that's the best interview that I've ever had.
That's very sweet. We'll have a
And I can tell she's a writer.
We'll do page 2 next.
I didn't mean to cut you short, but I was
No,
grabbing
no,
a
no.
mic so that if anyone has a question, they can be mic'd for
Definitely.
the audio. So please raise your hand and I'll run a mic to you. Someone, be brave. Okay.
Alicia.
Alicia.
Hello, both of you. Julia, you know, I've read probably all of your books, and I'm in the middle of reading Cemeteries. And one of the things that I'm loving about it is it sounds like it has so much wisdom. And I just thought, el juicio nos viene cuando ya estamos ancianos, ¿verdad? And so as we get older, we get wiser. And so I just wanted to tell you that I feel that in that book. Every word just sounds different to me from your past books.
Wow.
It's just beautiful. I just wanted to tell you that.
Thank you. Well, there is something to be said for 50 years in the craft and 74 years in the body.
Yes, yes.
I better have something to show for it.
But just the way that you know, taking your stories back home, like I think that takes, you tell me what that takes, you know, to take those stories home to the Dominican and to talk about who's there and the stories there, you know, and that respeto for identity and roots in third world, right?
Yeah.
I mean, from the first world. Yeah, and just what it took for you to write this in terms of looking at your whole life. It feels like you're looking at your whole life and then bringing it to this piece.
Well, you know, when you're a younger writer and you have all these boxes with drafts and all these things and all these research projects that were going to be a story and all these characters you've left hanging, but you think, oh, someday I'm going to write this down. And then when you get to be older, you realize that's not going to happen. And yet you feel like these have been a part of you. And what are you going to do? And that's where this idea of a ritualized closure of a cemetery comes up. And I've always loved cemeteries. I had a friend when I was moving around the country I call myself a migrant writer then, wherever I could get a little job, I would go. And I had a friend in Kentucky who told me that whenever I got to a new town, the first place I had to visit was its cemetery, because that will tell you, he said, a lot about this town, how the people treat their dead. And I thought, yeah, you know, there are writing prompts all over in a cemetery. There's that tombstone, and then there's these little tombstones, and you check the dates, and you realize, oh my gosh, she lost one every year. And then she dies, and there's another tombstone that's the second wife. And you think, oh, I wonder, how did that happen? And so, they're not to be disrespectful of people's dead, but it is.
Anyone?
Hi, Julia.
Hi.
I've loved you for a very long time. Your books are just part of my history, too. One of the things... Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, is this better? Yes. Okay. I wondered, Alma says, I'm coming to the end of my writing career. I wondered if that's something you are dealing with. Like, do you feel like that's possible? That you could come and say that?
I don't think that, I think I'll always be writing. It's how I think. And that's my little extension of my brain, it's so much a practice, like any practice, meditation. If you're an athlete, it's so much the way I process and make meaning and sense out of my life. So I think that component will be there. I think the thing is the writing biz, I call it with a Z. I don't mean to tarnish our debut novelist as she sets out on the journey, but there's a way in which, there's so much handling and marketing and all of that, which kind of is, especially with social media. I mean, I've hired somebody who pretends to be me online. I hate to disappoint everybody. I don't even know my password for Facebook. I can't keep up with that stuff, but even if you try to keep it out, it comes in like a gas under the door. It's the world we live in. And I think it's already the world without me, is the way I think about it. And book touring, 10 stops it's the mini tour. It should have been like 20 stops or whatever. And I call this my swan song tour because I can't do this anymore. I love engaging with readers, but the travel and the razzmatazz, and we're solitary critters, writers. I mean, we spend...
We'll still get you to come to the Vermont Bookshop.
Oh, I'll always come there. And by the way, everybody, next year is Becky's 20th at the Vermont Bookshop and the 75th anniversary, and I think we need a parade. And I think every
We'll organize
writer,
that when you're done with this tour.
Yeah, we every writer, I'm sure, will come out for it, and we could have a little chair in front of the bookstore and nonstop reading to commemorate, and then we put Becky and her staff on a car, and they. I think it's worth it. We need to do that. Celebrate. Yeah. She wants to get another question.
I would love to get another question. Anyone? I'm going to come up the stairs and force it. Okay, George.
Julia, I wanted to follow up on something you mentioned earlier, how poetry was one of your, really a first love. But
Is that George?
Yes.
Okay.
You do adult novels, young novels, you write essays, you write haikus, you write poetry. What are the challenges and satisfactions and frustrations of each of those styles of writing?
How much?
Easy question.
I think if you're trying to write well, George, it's always hard work. You joy in it because you love this and its possibilities, but it's always hard work and frustrating, and each one presents its own, and I don't mean just depending on what genre you've decided or it decides for you. It doesn't matter what you're writing, even if it's the next novel, you have to learn how to write that novel. So the beginner's mind is a wonderful phrase. You have the craft and the experience, but you have to learn how to write that novel. And so there's always that challenge of, of how to make the form for that story and those characters. And so with poetry, poetry is such a, I start every writing day by reading poetry, because it's like that little choir master's thing on his pipe to get everybody up to a certain level. And I feel like poetry sets the bar so high. And after that, my, prose is like wanting to be as exacting, which it can't be, but as exacting and as rhythmical in its own way as when you're writing poems. So it's a different challenge. Even when I was teaching fiction writing classes, I would sometimes annoy my students by starting the class, the first few assignments, by having them write poems. And haikus were a favorite thing for them to do, just little snapshots that make them become aware of the details in their lives. So I think poetry is a great way to refine the writing. And George himself is a wonderful haiku master of Weybridge, of the world. He writes his emails in haikus, believe it or not.
Favoring the youth here.
Wow.
Okay. Hi. Oh, wow.
I love you got the white version of this.
Yeah, my mom has a black one, so.
Oh my goodness. Oh.
So hi, I'm Summer.
What's your name?
Summer.
Summer.
Yeah. And I'm from New York as well, and my mom is from Dominican Republic.
Whoa.
Yeah. Yeah, and now we live in Vermont.
In Middlebury?
Yeah.
Wow. I did not know that.
And so I'm reading your book, In the Time of the Butterflies, and I also wanted to ask you if you actually write your stories in Spanish, like if like how this one is in Spanish, do you translate it? Like, do you write it in English and then translate it, or do you write the word in
Summer.
Spanish?
I am going to disappoint you. I write them in English. I don't know. I never was trained in Spanish. I came to this country before such things as bilingual education or multicultural literature or anything like that. And so the nuns would punish my sisters and myself if they caught us speaking Spanish in the playground. So it was learn your English, and my parents were behind it because they wanted us to make it in this world. So I was oral. I have childhood Spanish. I'm orally bilingual, but I didn't study the literature. I didn't have the training in writing it. So I don't even translate my own books, but I read the proof and I drive the translator crazy because I'll say, that's not right, it doesn't sound right. She said, well, what do you suggest? I don't know. So I don't have I never learned to ride the horse of Spanish as I try to ride the horse of English, and constantly throws me off, but at least I can manage to stay in the saddle for a while. But with Spanish, I can't do it. And this book this is the first book that the English and Spanish came out at the same time. Usually the Spanish is staggered and it comes out a year later, like the paperback. And so this is the first time, and I love it that they were born at the same time. So yes, lamentablemente, as we say, I'm not truly bilingual. I hope you are, Summer. that mommy's teaching you?
She better.
She better. I wish you had been my mommy.
I started reading you in Spanish, but I want her to read also Spanish, but I never lost my accent. But yes, that's the reason why, and we're so honored.
Well, thank you. And you came in the uniform.
Representing.
And is that true?
That's my boss.
Thank you. Thank you both. Thank you, Summer.
And we have one last question for this young lady here, and then we'll do a signing.
Hello. My mother and I are visiting from Pennsylvania, where we both teach. And I would just like to ask you what advice you have for young students learning Spanish at the high school level.
Ooh. Maybe Summer should take that one. I mean, I'm the worst example. I think one thing that I know is really helpful, and Middlebury does a version of that in the language schools by having total immersion. I mean, there's nothing like being thrown in the deep end of the pool, landing in a foreign country, not with your girlfriends or your friends, and having to communicate to learn a language. It just, everything around you is in that language, and you're having to survive in it. And amazing how quickly you pick it up. So I don't know how to recreate that in a classroom where you only have them, 43 minutes, it's tough. Doing maybe a trip to a country, and we have a perfect country for you to go to. And a perfect project, the Mariposa Foundation, and even Middlebury College goes there for its alternate spring break trips, and they work with girls there in the Mariposa Foundation, and it's total immersion.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Julia and
Oh.
Carolyn. That's fabulous.
We didn't talk at all about yours, and I'm almost not quite done with it, but
We're so
Oh,
grateful
this is
for
not
your
it.
time. And I'm going to invite people, if you'd like to have Julia or Carolyn inscribe a book, to join them in their living room. There's a railing on the stairs over there if you need a little boost. If you really can't